Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up podcast. And I'm your host, Bannon Crowley, and I'm my co-host with me, Colin Martin.
How's it going?
And we have a lot to talk about today. This is going to be our last episode before the draft. As we're recording it, it is Wednesday, so this will be coming up tomorrow for you guys, the day of the draft. So we'll be talking about that, all the news that we have. There's going to be a lot going on, and also the first round of the NBA playoffs, which have come to a surprise to pretty much all of us in the East and the West. So we're going to talk about the playoffs first, so then we can just go into a deep dive with the draft later. And let's just start off with the series that have officially finished. The first series to finish, the only sweep in the first round that we saw was the 76ers versus the Nets. And the Sixers, like we said, get this done in 4 games. And Joel Embiid comes out with an injury in this series. And we're not really sure how serious it is, but now that they won't be playing their series until starting it, at least until next Monday, this is good for the Sixers overall. And we talked about this series a little bit last week. And with Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey being the MVPs of this series for me, it's going to be hard for a team to beat the Sixers, especially the Celtics, in my opinion, if Embiid can come back and be healthy and if Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey are going to be on. But we just have to wait and see what happens with Tobias Harris. One thing that I could see coming out of this, even with them getting a sweep and the Celtics kind of going a little bit off the rails, letting the Hawks get a few games. Obviously, the rest is good for Embiid, but for a guy like Tobias Harris, we'll have to see if his hot hand slows down or not once the series starts.
Yeah, and the Celtics definitely put themselves at a disadvantage, especially as we recorded last night, being Tuesday, losing to Atlanta at TD Garden. That seemed like a very easy opportunity to wrap the series up and then, go into a series with Philly. And, I guess kind of, I don't want to say make it easier for themselves, but I think that's not a bad way to put it. But, letting Embiid rest up a little more and letting, we have our feelings about Doc Rivers, but letting him game plan a little bit longer is not something in the Celtics' favor. So, I mean, we'll see. I think we both assume the Celtics are going to wrap things up in Atlanta. But, I mean, the last thing you want to do is give good players more time. And that's exactly what the Celtics are doing with Embiid right now. So it's getting a little bit dangerous. Hopefully the Celtics, as a Celtics fan, can wrap it up in 6. But, if Atlanta pushes it to 7, then, we can't, knock this off as the Celtics falling off. This could be Atlanta winning the series. So, hopefully we see something.
So the next series that we'll talk about is the Nuggets against the Timberwolves, and the Nuggets won this series 4-1 after last night. Very close game to end it, but Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert both fouled out, so the Nuggets end up coming away with a win in this one, and the Timberwolves ended up winning Game 4. That's why it ended 4-1, and almost won Game 5 too. But with that being said, the Nuggets get by, and I'll ask you how you feel about this series overall first.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last episode. I think we both predicted a sweep. This Minnesota team's just not on their level. I was impressed with Anthony Edwards. I've had my complaints with him in the past just for his inefficiency, but he had a pretty good series. But if I'm Minnesota, you kind of put yourself in the worst position possible because you don't really have a good future set out for your team. You lose in 5 or you lose in 6 in the first round last year, and then you take this total revamp of your team just to lose in 5 this year. It's not something that I would be particularly happy about as a Timberwolves fan, if the Timberwolves have any fans. So, I mean, if I'm Denver, I'm happy with how it went. Obviously, you like the sweep, but I think Minnesota was good enough to knock a game off, as we saw. So, I mean, overall, it's probably the least exciting series, 1v8 seed, but Denver moves on as we expected, and it puts them in a really interesting matchup with Phoenix after.
Yeah. So the last series that we have as of right now with that has finished. As of this recording, there'll be 3 games on tonight, or 4 actually, I believe. So we might have more by tomorrow's finish. But what we know as of right now is the Suns beat the Clippers 4-1. Obviously, the Clippers had injuries with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. So the Suns obviously took advantage of that. And I want to dive a little into this one too, because there's been some talk about Kawhi Leonard obviously going on. And Stephen A. Smith came out today with kind of a a hot take saying that they should not really force Kawhi into retirement, but at least kind of bring in the question. And at first, I was pretty defensive about this, obviously, but thinking about it from the standpoint of the Clippers, Kawhi Leonard, he's at the point where age-wise and injury history-wise, it's going to be pretty close. If he comes up with another knee injury, he's going to be done. And we'll have to see if he even recovers from this one. I hope he does, obviously. But it's the Clippers are at a point where they don't really want to be, because Paul George obviously is getting older every single season too, and they have Russell Westbrook too, and that's kind of their big three right now. Obviously, we saw Russ do good in the playoffs, but they didn't. They won one game out of it, so it doesn't really matter. So I guess my question to you: what do you think the Clippers do going forward regarding Kawhi, Paul George, Russell Westbrook, their future, and everything?
Yeah, one thing I want to touch on, and it seems like we see this every year with at least a team or two, teams that rest their best player throughout the year and then get them ready for the playoffs, right? This year, the prime example was the Clippers with Kawhi Leonard. I think we don't point out a big flaw in that logic, and that being you're going to get a tougher playoff matchup because you're going to get a lower seed. And I understand Kawhi's had injuries all year. I don't think you should force a guy into playing when he's hurt, but if the Clippers had Kawhi during the regular season, that puts them at a higher seed. Maybe they're a 3 seed or higher, something like that. And then they can get an easier matchup, or maybe you don't need Paul George and Kawhi every game like we saw this series. But that wasn't the case this year. This year, they don't play their stars during the season and they get Phoenix first round. Honestly, I mean, we saw it when Kawhi was playing. It was going to be a good series either way. So when he was out and PG was out, it was never going to happen. So I just think when it comes to that logic that they ran with this year, it was never going to work. When it comes to their future, I don't think they're in a good place at all. I mean, they mortgaged a lot of their future to get Paul George. And, at the time he had a little bit of injury concerns. He got hurt in Indiana, but it's just become more and more obvious now. And it's just, they don't really have a future outside of PG and Kawhi. So if I'm them, I'm a little hesitant to, make any big changes. I think you kind of have to run your course with Paul George and Kawhi. If I'm a Clippers fan, I don't think it's going to work. I mean, I guess you kind of want a guy like Kawhi to retire, which is wild because when he's playing, he's still top 10. He can be borderline top 5 on a given night. So, I mean, I don't think the Clippers have a future. It's kind of a shame. You know, they don't have, point guard. I like Russell Westbrook. He had a good series, but you don't have a backup. You don't have any young options on this team. They don't play any youthful players. And the guys they do play that are young are going to be gone and leaving free agency. I look at a guy like Bones Highlands. He's not a long-term solution for the Clippers. So if I can answer your question, I guess I don't know. Honestly, I don't think the Clippers have a good path to follow. I think we're eventually going to get to a point where maybe Kawhi retires, PG forces his way out, and it's just like a whole big rebuild. I think the Clippers set themselves up to be, I guess, too big to fail. But the problem is, while doing that, we saw teams like Golden State and even teams like the Lakers and the teams like the Bucks, build solid teams that were just better. So I don't know. It brings to question, can you really have 2 superstars and no role players and win? Because, just looking at the numbers right here, that looks like a no.
Yeah. And one point that I want to bring up, like you said, even if they played Kawhi, obviously if they got a higher seed, you would see an easier matchup. But let's say they're the 3 seed, they end up playing the Warriors. If they're the 2 seed, they end up playing the Lakers too. So overall, for a guy like Kawhi, it's going past this or before this season too, he's load managed ever since he's been on the Clippers, him and Paul George. And if you're load managing them for the playoffs and then they don't play in the playoffs, what are they doing? They're just
Yeah.
sitting on the team on the bench like Ben Simmons. But when they play, they're good. And I like Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, I think he would be, if he had a completely healthy career, I think he's at least a top 15 player of all time. Like you said, when he's on the court, he's probably the best defender in the league. And it's just sad to see a team like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard that has been built up for so many years at this point, starting in 2019, when we saw them kind of form that big team that would be going against the Nets when they had Kyrie and KD. And then we see how both these teams fall out. Obviously, the Nets don't have their stars anymore, but I would argue the Nets got more success in one season when they made it to the I mean, almost made it to the finals with just KD than the Clippers have done the whole entire time with Kawhi and Paul George.
Yeah, and I think that's fair.
So I guess next we'll go up to a team that I would say everyone is surprised about. The Heat are up 3-1 right now on the Bucks, and Jimmy Butler just had one of the greatest playoff performances of all time last game, absolutely going insane in the fourth quarter with an amazing comeback. And if I'm looking at this series, if there's any team that can come back down 3-1, I think it's the Bucks, but it's going to be hard because even though they're going to be at home for this next game, um, they still have to go back to Miami in game 6. And I'm not really sure if the Bucks can come out of this one, not because they're not good enough, but I think if Jimmy Butler goes out there and decides to just go insane again, it's going to be really hard. And we've seen, especially last game, the Bucks just completely collapsing at the end of the game. And if you're going to give the Bucks, if you're going to give the Heat a chance to stay in the game with Jimmy Butler, you're not going to win that game.
Yeah, and I'll come up here and add to your point. I guess this will be my little prediction. And it's wild. I think the Bucks will come back from 3-1. And I know that's crazy, which is how well Jimmy Butler's been playing. But the fact of the matter is Jimmy Butler's been playing insane, and Milwaukee's still been in some games. If Jimmy Butler doesn't go off as he did 56 in the last game they played, Milwaukee gets that, and it's 2-2. And we're talking completely different about the series. I think Giannis being hurt put them down a lot, but he's back. And say what you will about Giannis, I don't think he's the type of guy to give up on a series like this, especially not when he's leading the team that's the 1 seed in the East. I know Jimmy Butler's been playing phenomenal, but as you mentioned, it goes back to Milwaukee as we're recording this tonight. I think the Heat sure up that game, and after that, they just got to get one in Miami, and that's the toughest part. But one thing about this Heat team is that they don't have Tyler Hero anymore. And, say what you will, they've still been good, but that's a big knock on their team. We see guys like Max Strus, and he has his games sometimes, but for the most part, Milwaukee's been kind of handling him. I think if Middleton can stay consistent, which is always an issue, I think Giannis can really will this team back kind of on his own. I think Drew Holiday had a really bad game as we recorded this yesterday or the day before. I think he is very solid in the playoffs. I think he can handle his business. I like Milwaukee to win it. I know that's crazy, but when you really think about it, it shouldn't be crazy because we both know it's the better team. So, this is a really fun series. I give a lot of credit to the Heat, but I know it's 3-1. I'm not counting the Bucks out yet.
Yeah. One guy that we did that I mentioned before this series that we might see coming in, especially with the Tyler Hero injury, is Duncan Robinson. And he's come in and played very well. He dropped 20 points in one game. Last game, he dropped 9. And the game before that, he dropped 14. So for a guy that I don't even know if he played very many regular season minutes this year, just to come in and start shooting threes, that's all he does. So that's obviously great for the Heat. And like I said before, I think if there's any team that's down 3-1 right now that can come back, it is the Bucks. Obviously, they're my favorite to win the championship, but the East surprisingly has been very interesting in this first round overall. And Giannis last game, especially watching him down the stretch, he was very hesitant to go to the rim. Obviously, with his back injury, going up there, it would be tough for him. But somehow the Heat just were able to get him inside. Bam Adebayo was great last game at the end of the game, going up there and blocking Giannis at the rim, which is very surprising, especially considering I thought the Heat would be out of it in the play-in game because Bam was so bad in the first play-in game against the Hawks. But now we see the Hawks winning 2 games in the playoffs too. So it's very interesting to look at all these play-in teams right now. And I guess for this series especially, it just depends on how Giannis is going to play in the next game. Depends on what Giannis we see. If we see a passive Giannis, it's going to be really hard for the rest of the team because, like we said, Drew Holiday, he can step it up, obviously, but if he's off, I kind of have a hard time trusting the rest of the team. We're looking at a guy like Grayson Allen, who is a guy like Desmond Bane too, who can shoot you out of a game or can shoot you in a game. It just depends on how they play that night. And a guy like Chris Middleton, who I don't even know what to expect from him night in and night out.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough on that. I mean, I don't know what order you want to go in with this series, but I want to bring it to another 3-1 series that we are very surprised about. And, it's a 4 versus a 5 seed. We see Cleveland and the Knicks. We both had Cleveland making it out pretty easily. I came on the record and said I thought they were going to sweep them. And the Knicks have proved me wrong to the highest degree. I think Jalen Brunson's been getting a lot of credit, and I think it's deserved. He has been phenomenal in this series. Julius Randle's definitely had his nights, don't get me wrong. But RJ Barrett is probably the biggest storyline for me in this. He's came alive, kind of. He started the series slow. He's had a pretty poor season, especially with the expectations he had. But RJ Barrett's had a really good series, and the Knicks are up 3-1. And I hate to look ahead, but if Miami does close out Milwaukee, that puts New York in the second round facing up against the 8th seed, which is something they've never seen before. It would definitely be interesting. So I want to ask you, like, how do you think the Knicks progress from here? First off, do you think they're going to close out Cleveland's? But in a potential Miami matchup, what do you see?
I mean, I remember when we were talking about this, I think in the start of March, we had an episode talking about if the Knicks were back or not. And I remember saying, I think they could end up having that Heat type, or not the Heat, the Hawks type run to the conference finals. Obviously, the Cavs team is good, and we both predicted them to go far. But if they got out of this first round, then if they go against the Heat, I think they're going to win that series. I think the Heat are going to obviously flare out in the second round. I don't think they're going to be able to hold up this momentum. They're going to be going against a very hot team. And I remember you saying that there's no way, no how that the Knicks would be able to win a series in the playoffs. And I just want to make sure that you apologize to all the Knicks fans that are
Yeah,
watching this.
I want to say I'm sorry to all the Knicks fans watching. I want to say sorry to Mud. I want to say sorry to all the Knicks fans I know. But I mean, this is just a different Knicks team than we talked about in March or May, whatever we talked about it. It's just, the problem with the Knicks is they weren't consistent. They had, Brunson and Randall who can be stars at some point. I wouldn't blame you if you put either of them on an all NBA team, but they were just inconsistent. And we look at RJ Barrett, more inconsistency across the board. And they've just been lights out this playoffs. I mean, people talk about MSG in the playoffs and how it's a different environment. And I think we've seen it firsthand. I mean, it's electric out there. I really think that the Knicks stars are playing up to their degree. And, as much as I don't like Knicks coaching, I think it's been good. And, we get spark plugs like Josh Hart and Emmanuel Quickly. And, this team is phenomenal. So I'll come on the record. I'll apologize. But I definitely did not see this coming. I'll say that.
Yeah, and it's just going to be interesting too, because I would say that at this point, the Sixers and Celtics second round matchup is basically the Eastern Conference Finals for me. I think whoever wins that series, I would expect completely to get by the Knicks and the winner of the Knicks and potentially the Heat. Obviously, both those series, they're up 3-1 right now, but it's going to be very interesting how this Eastern Conference goes down. And I would expect either the Celtics or the Sixers, if the Bucks don't come back, to have out of that series alone, relatively easy path to the finals.
Yeah, and I agree with that. To kick it over to another series that I was wrong about, we're going to jump down the board a little bit. The Lakers are up 3-1 on Memphis. I came in here not a Lakers believer at all. I thought it would be a little bit closer than we saw with Cleveland and New York. But, I mean, the Lakers look great out there. There's no denying it. This has been a very competitive series with Memphis. I know how much you love Dylan Brooks and Desmond Bane. So I want to kick it off and ask you questions. What do you see in this series that's such a difference maker? And assuming the Lakers get out of it, how far could they go?
I have been saying since we started this podcast that the Lakers would make the playoffs. I remember at that point, there was a lot of momentum, people saying that the Lakers were done. LeBron was done. You got to trade AD. You got to trade LeBron. You got to get everyone out. And the Lakers have come back, and they were one of the best teams down the stretch for the rest of the season. And LeBron James last game had an absolute amazing performance, 20-20 game. And just the lore of this, Dylan Brooks going against him, saying in January, I'm going to make him drive left every single time. And LeBron drives left and hits the dagger on him in overtime. You can't write it any better. The Lakers go up 3-1 in this series, and they're going to be going against the winner of the Kings and the Warriors, who I had the Warriors in 6. I still think that's completely possible. It might go to 7. It'll be interesting how that series ends up going. But I mean, the Lakers, I think they compete against the Warriors, especially because they have that big man advantage. And going against the Kings, too, like we've seen, the Kings will probably be pretty similar to the Grizzlies in the just overall playoff experience department that we've seen. And the Lakers going against the Grizzlies, too. We've seen that LeBron and AD know what to do in late game scenarios. And we've seen guys like Dennis Schroeder who hit a clutch shot to win the game until Anthony Davis decided he didn't want that win. They don't want any handouts. But the rest of the team has been playing amazing. And the way that Austin Reeves too, fourth quarter, absolutely amazing. I expect the Lakers to get this done in 6 at the most. I understand if they don't win the next game, I don't think it's anything. I don't think the Grizzlies come back anyway, down 3-1 at this point. But
Yeah, I mean,
I had the Lakers in 7, and I'm not surprised by this series at all, really.
Yeah, and I'll admit defeat again. I did not see this coming. But one thing I will say about a potential Kings matchup is the Kings are not the Grizzlies. I know they're a lower seed, but they are similar on the levels of not a lot of playoff experience. But the Kings have the clutch player of the year. We see a lot of these games. The Grizzlies go in maybe up 5 with like 5 minutes left, per se. Maybe not exactly, but you get the idea. And they fumble it. LeBron and AD, they play too smart. They make the right reads. They hit tough shots. That's not going to happen the same against Sacramento. AD is going to have some problems with Sabonis, for example. And, I understand Jaren Jackson. I understand, but they've been absolutely abusing switches to have guys like Xavier Tillman on LeBron and AD. The Kings don't have an Xavier Tillman. I like Xavier Tillman. I think he's a good player, but he's not supposed to be guarding LeBron James with 20 seconds left on the clock in a win or die playoff game. It's absolutely unbelievable to me. If they go against the Kings, there's going to be some more clutch, situations where I trust De'Aaron Fox. I know we just had a tough one against the Warriors, but he clawed that team all the way back in many scenarios throughout the season. So I like that. With that being said, I like how the Lakers match up with both of those teams. Besides that point, I think maybe the Lakers are going to be good enough where Sacramento doesn't get to show off that they're clutch. They might beat the Kings easily sometimes. I think the Warriors, I'm not a huge fan of the Warriors this playoffs. I don't think they've been that good, if I can be honest. I think Curry's had his moments. I don't think the team's been great. I think the Lakers could beat that team. So, I'm coming all the way back, like circling around on this. I've hated the Lakers all year. I've been saying horrible things, but if the Lakers can handle business with Memphis, we could see them going pretty damn far. Like, I'm talking all the way far. And I hate to say that because, if we talked a couple weeks ago about how good this team was, they were barely playoff good. But right now, they are like, they have played NBA Finals good, which is, it's tough for me to say, but you can't deny it when you watch them play. They're going to win. Like, when you watch them, it's unbelievable. They always find a way. They always hit the tough shots. And, these role guys that haven't been amazing usually, they step up. We saw Austin Reeves game 1. We saw Schroeder hit the should-be game winner. This team is good. I hate them, but they're really good.
Yeah, one guy on the Kings that I would relate to Xavier Tillman in a sense where they don't really do much is Harrison Barnes. And Harrison Barnes, if he's playing against the Lakers and he's going to pull up from 3 with 22 seconds left on the clock every possession, it's going to be easy pickings for them.
Harrison Barnes is so much better at guarding a guy like LeBron than Xavier Tillman. I can't even articulate it. Xavier Tillman is a slow 6'9" center. Harrison Barnes is mid, but at least he can move in his old age. Like, I disagree.
Well, offensively, that's what I was saying. If he's going to pull up from 3 with 22 seconds left and brick the shot every time, the Lakers are going to get by easily. And if we're talking about the Kings with the clutch player of the year, we got to talk about the Lakers with one of the greatest clutch players of all time. I think that at least at the very minimum evens it out. But I have in my bracket that I had the Warriors and Lakers coming into this matchup, and I'm pretty sure yeah, I had the Warriors coming out with a win in this series. I do think it'll be very interesting though. I think my reasoning for that in our official playoff predictions was I thought that the Lakers would kind of run out of momentum, especially against a team with the most championship pedigree and history that we've seen since the Bulls in the 90s, with that big four that they have. And I could still see that series really going either way. I had the Warriors winning in six, but I could see the Lakers coming out on top too because of their big men. It's just going to depend. Both of these teams, I would say the Warriors have not very great big men, but could still handle a little bit. And the Lakers don't really have great shooting and point guards. I mean, D'Angelo Russell can be good on a night, but you're not going to compare D'Angelo Russell to Steph Curry the same way you're not going to compare Kayvon Looney to Anthony Davis. So it's just going to depend. I could definitely see one night the Warriors hitting like 43s, and then one night the Lakers just absolutely dominating in the paint.
Yeah, but I don't think the Warriors are going to make it there, Banning. I'm not going to lie to you. This has been an amazing series with Sacramento and Golden State. And if I can tell you the truth, I'm a little worried about De'Aaron Fox's injury. I think that's the big X factor. You know, having a hand-arm injury for a point guard, a guy that's so quick and handles the rock so often, that's a downside. But if we're talking about how the teams have played, I mean, I think Sacramento has outplayed Golden State. I'm going to use your favorite, phrase right here. It's not a series until a team wins on the road, and we haven't seen that yet. So, things I think are still to get even more interesting. But if I can be honest, I think we've seen Sabonis play at some of his worst all year, and it's still a tie series. Sabonis is an all NBA, all star sort of guy this year, and he's barely shown up, and the Kings are still willing their way out of games. I think assuming Sabonis can show up, assuming Draymond Green doesn't want to kick him again, I think we're looking at a really good. I think it's going to go to 7, if I can just be honest here. But I still think Sacramento closes it out. We talked about clutch guys. I'm taking De'Aaron Fox in the clutch. Whether you would take him or LeBron, we don't have to worry about till later. But I'm taking De'Aaron Fox in the clutch over anybody in the league this season right now. So I don't even know if we'll see Golden State play LA.
I mean, if I don't think I would take De'Aaron Fox over Steph Curry in the clutch.
The numbers this year, I would. All time, obviously, way different conversation. But De'Aaron Fox is the most clutch player in the league right now. I'm not, injury or not, game 7, the Kings have a chance to hit a game winner. I hope he shoots it. He has proven that he will make it.
I don't think we're going to game 7. That's the problem. I think the Warriors have kept it close in both games in Sacramento, and then they blew them out in game 3. And the Kings were obviously close in game 4 too, but we've seen the Warriors be able to be in all of these games. And I don't see how the Kings win this series. The Kings overall as a team, Sabonis is not playing good, and he's come out and he's shown that he's a fraud. Obviously having 14 points and 15 points in Golden State, not great overall from your second best player. De'Aaron Fox, the injury, he said he's not worried about it, so I'm not worried about it. He might just be hiding it, but he's going to go out and do his thing. And if we go to a game 6, Klay Thompson's going to win that game. So I'm not worried about that.
The only thing I'll bring up, and I want to bring this up, it's not a series till a team wins on the road. The Warriors can't win on the road. They're horrible at it. They were 11-30 on the road this year. Say what you will about Sacramento. It hasn't been a historic home arena for a long time, but right now they have a ton of juice. There's the whole light the beam thing, and there's genuinely players on Sacramento that show out at home. I feel like Malik Monk is a prime example. When he's at home, he is shooting the lights out. I don't know what it is. It might just be a mentality thing. I might be reading into it too much, but Golden State has to win on the road to win the series. At least once. If it goes to 7, twice. And I don't like to see that. I mean, they're 11-30 on the road this year. Golden State has historically been in this era while they've been this championship team with a lot of pedigree, a team that beats everybody, home or away. This year, they're just not that team. That's why they're a 6th seed, and that's why it's 2-2. When on paper, this team should be better than Sacramento. I don't know. If the Warriors have to win on the road to clutch up this series, which they do at this point, I'm taking Sacramento. I don't know how else to say it.
I mean, we'll just have to wait and see what happens The
We will
game
have to
is
wait and
tonight
see.
as if we're recording, and I would say this game is probably the biggest game in the series at this point. Um, and I think we're on to the final series that we're talking about. We talked about it a little bit leading up to it, but the Celtics and Hawks matchup, the Celtics are up 3-2 as they dropped the last two games to Atlanta. Trae Young had one of the most interesting shot selections that I've ever seen, but it went in and they won the game, so you can't really say much about it.
Yeah, I mean, that was heartbreaking as a Celtics fan a little bit. This is like the most Boston Celtics series ever. The Celtics beat up on the Hawks in the first two games, and you're like, all right, let's wrap it. We're done. Let's get ready for Philly. And then, we see I don't want to call names out directly, but I'm sure he's not watching us right now. Jason Tatum just like get looks like he gets bored out there and starts playing with his food a little bit. And you go up by 10 going into the fourth quarter, and Jaylen Brown is cooking. When we see Tatum ends up shooting 1 for 11 from three. I mean, it's just kind of embarrassing. You expect a player such as Tatum to go out there and at least have some level of consistency, but that's just not what we see. And it's a little disappointing. With that being said, the Atlanta Hawks aren't built to beat the Celtics. It's just not meant to happen. The fact that they have two games is embarrassing enough. I really hope we see Tatum and Brown, kind of buck up a little bit, go into game six and just end things. But I mean, who knows at this point? It's it's getting a little frustrating if I can be honest. But I think the Celtics win in six and doesn't set them up great for a series against Philly. I think, you as a Philly fan and Philly fans in general are probably pretty happy to see Boston struggling with a team like Atlanta in the first round.
Yeah, and I think even with a team like the Nuggets too, who obviously won that series in five, but two close games, I don't think we've seen a single team in this playoff come out and be completely dominant of a series. We even saw, I'll talk about it, the Sixers end up sweeping the Nets, but coming out of that, James Harden didn't play great in a few of the games, and Joel Embiid comes out with an injury. If Embiid doesn't come out with an injury in that series and is completely healthy, then I would be coming on here saying easy championship victory to this point. But because of that injury, we have not seen a team on either side come out and be completely dominant. I would even I guess if I had to argue for one team, it would be the Lakers, which is the most interesting thing that we've seen, being up 3-1. But overall, there's holes in every single team that we've seen. Even a team like the Suns too, who won 4-1 against the Clippers. Obviously, the Clippers had injuries too, and Devin Booker was great in that series. It just on both sides of the bracket, it's these matchups are going to be great to watch, and this playoff is going to be very interesting. I hope that the Celtics end up getting it done in 6 or 7 at this point. It doesn't really matter at this point for me because with this getting moved to 6 games, the series will officially start next Monday. So Embiid will have the most rest that he can. So thank you, Trae Young, for that. I would expect the Celtics to win this series, but if this goes to a game 7, I don't want to say it's up in the air, but if the Celtics are up by 10 points with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, I'm not ruling the Hawks out to win.
Yeah, I mean, it should sound obvious, but if Boston doesn't close out in six, a game seven's a game seven. We can see anything happen. And, Atlanta is a tough team. They've proven they could win in TD Garden. So, as a Celtics fan, I'm kind of praying over here, close out in six, because, we can't just assume a game seven would be a dub. With that being said, I want to ask you one more question before, we wrap it up or move on to the next. But so with Milwaukee kind of, not being at their best right now, wavering is the word I was looking for. Is there really a team out here that's a pure favorite? I think Milwaukee was a big one for people, and Boston might have been a close second. But with Boston struggling and Miami Milwaukee maybe on the way out, like, how are we feeling about any of these finals matchups?
I think the obvious answer to most people would be the Suns at this point with Kevin Durant and everything that's going on over there. But there's so many teams in the West, especially too, that it's going to be a dogfight coming out of there. I think coming out of the East too, it's going to be hard. Like I said, with healthy Embiid, the way that Maxey and Tobias Harris have been playing, that team itself should be able to propel itself to the finals. But coming out of the West too, in the second round, we're going to see a lot of great matchups. So I would say, as of right now, my favorite would probably be the Suns, but I'm not very confident on the pick.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. And just to show how we disagree, I mean, I don't have the Suns even winning their next series. It's really up in the air, I guess is my point. And as the playoffs progress, usually things get a little more clear cut. I think we're seeing the opposite. You never really know what's going to happen. So it's definitely been interesting, I'll say.
Yeah, I have the Suns winning the next series in six. I think
I
it's
I have the Nuggets winning their next series in six.
we'll have to see what happens, but
We'll have
hopefully
to see.
my perfect West stays up to par from what
Yeah.
we've seen. So now we'll move on to the NFL draft. This will probably be, well, I guess this will be the last mock draft that we have. Before the draft, there has been a lot coming out, obviously, before the draft. So we're just going to start this off. We'll go through our mock drafts. We can talk about each pick a little bit in depth. And then after that, we can talk about anything outstanding that we want to before the draft. So if you want to start, we'll go with our first pick each, starting with the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting lately. We see a lot of names. We thought that CJ Stroud was a lock maybe a couple weeks ago. And then we're seeing names like Levis and obviously Bryce Young float around. But at number one, I'm going to give the Panthers probably the most talented quarterback in this draft. I think that's who they traded up for. So I'm going to give them Bryce Young at number one.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Will Levis.
Absolutely not.
I also have the Panthers going with Bryce Young, number one overall. And now with the number two pick, we have the Texans. And this is where our mock drafts will probably be completely different for the rest of the draft.
Yeah, me and Banning were talking about this before we started airing. I don't know if we have a single agreement in any pick after this, but this is where it gets interesting. To speed it up a little bit, I'll just get to the chase. I think Houston's going to wait another year at quarterback. There's been a lot of buzz about that recently. At this point, I looked at their depth chart pretty, intensely, and they have nobody at edge right now. I think Will Anderson is still the best edge guy, so I have them taking him.
I also have the Texans taking Will Anderson at two. So, but I do think, like you said, if they take a quarterback here, it completely changes the whole trajectory of the rest of the draft.
Yeah. And so we get to three. Arizona's a team that's looking to trade down. It makes sense with their positioning. I think a lot of teams want to trade with them, clearly. I think Indianapolis is going to be too worried. I think they're going to trade up one spot. Arizona's still going to get one of their guys at 4, and they get a couple second round guys. I think Indianapolis is going to trade up one pick to number 3 and take CJ Stroud. They need they have Gardner Minshew as the starter right now. They need a guy that can start right away, and that doesn't scream Will Levis or Anthony Richardson to me.
So I have the opposite approach. There's been some news that the Cardinals might have a hard time trading out of this pick just because teams are very weary of the quarterbacks in this draft and a few of them might slide. So I have the Cardinals staying here, and there's been a lot of momentum about who they'll pick at this spot. And I'm just going on what I've seen. I have the Cardinals taking Paris Johnson Jr. at 3, which might be very interesting, but I found this on a bunch of the dirt sheets, and this reminds me a lot of the Andrew Thomas Giants pick, which I was very surprised about, but it could happen.
I actually don't hate that pick at all. They have a glaring need at tackle, and if they don't want to trade down for it and they really like Paris Johnson Jr., it's not even a bad pick.
I think he's a top 5 player in this draft. I wouldn't hate the pick.
Yeah, I think in many other drafts, he would be a lock for top 5. It's just kind of a weird year. So I like that. In my mock, I have the Cardinals at 4. They're up right after. This is interesting. I've been hearing a lot of buzz about this guy going there. I think Arizona's defense is a lot more of an issue than their offense right now. I really like Tyree Wilson. I think he would fit well with the squad. So I just penciled him there at 4 to Arizona.
And then at 4, we have the Colts, and they're going to take a quarterback at this point. And the Colts have been linked a lot with Will Levis. So I have Will Levis going at 4, the second quarterback taken in this draft. I don't like the pick, but it seems like the Colts are really in love with Will Levis, and it makes sense with that front office. Will Levis fits their mold of a quarterback.
Yeah, you could say that. So Seattle's at 5. This was a tough one for me. There's a lot of directions they could go. And, A guy like Jalen Carter obviously had a ton of buzz. He was projected to go number one before the Bears traded out of it. And he's fallen off for personal issues, but he's starting to get buzz up again just because of the pure talent. I think Seattle needs a defensive lineman that can, get after the quarterback. I know the character issues are, a problem, but I think he's worth the pick at 5. I have Jalen Carter at 5 to Seattle.
I also have Jalen Carter going to 5 at Seattle. But one thing I want to talk about too quickly is if Seattle doesn't take him at 5, I think from what I've seen, it is basically a lock that if Jalen Carter falls past 5, the Eagles will trade up to draft him within the 6 to 10 spot. They really want to match him up with his former teammate, Jordan Davis, which would be absolutely insane if Jordan Davis can get on the field and get more reps next year. So I think that'll be interesting to look ahead to.
Yeah. And so number 6, I have Detroit. This is kind of something where I had to put my personal opinion aside and listen to what I've heard scouts talking about, guys that know a little bit more than me. This is not my number 1 at their position, but he's very solid. I think he fits Detroit's mindset of the type of players they usually go after. I have them taking Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois at 6.
So I have the Lions taking probably the best player available in the draft at this point for me. I have them taking Tyree Wilson at 6.
Yeah. At number 7, Vegas is on the board. In my mock, Anthony Richardson and Will Levis are still here. I know Will Levis has a lot of ties with the Raiders. With that being said, I have them taking Anthony Richardson. I think they have Garoppolo. They can cut him after next year. That minimum gives Anthony Richardson 1 season to develop, 2 if they really think he should develop more. I think it's worth the pick. So that's where I have him.
So I have the Raiders at 7, and they have CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson still on the board at this point. But there's been a lot of talk that they don't want to go towards quarterback. And with both of these guys having some issues that we've seen coming out recently, I think they're going to take Devon Witherspoon, who has kind of been proven to be the number 1 corner in this draft by a lot of experts.
Yeah. At 8, I have the Falcons making a trade. I think this is where Tennessee trades up. Obviously, they're trading up with Will Levis on the board, so that seems like an easy selection. I actually disagree. I don't know if they're going to figure out their quarterback situation in this draft, but Paris Johnson Jr. is slipping too far. They need an offensive tackle bad. We discussed earlier, he's probably a top 5 talent in this draft, so I have him trading up to grab Paris Johnson at 8.
I have the Falcons at 8 going with Bijan Robinson. There's been a lot of pickup about this recently, and I think he would be a good fit and kind of bolster up that fantasy offensive talent that they have.
Yeah. At 9, I think the Bears are pretty mad that Paris Johnson went right in front of them, but I think they stick with their same process. They really need a tackle for the future. I haven't taken Broderick Jones out of Georgia. There's been a lot of buzz about him. I don't know if a team like that loves a guy like Peter Skoronski. I honestly think he'll be more of a guard in the NFL. So I'm rolling with Broderick Jones here. I think prototypically he fits their system really well.
So I have the Bears at 9. Obviously, Paris Johnson going 3 in my draft. So I think they take Christian Gonzalez here, which might be an interesting pick. But if you're the Bears, you can't let him fall past 9.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. In my mock draft, the Bears did let him fall past 9, and Philly won't let that happen. Christian Gonzalez is one of my favorite prospects in this whole draft. He's my corner 1. And there's been a lot of buzz about Philly grabbing Bijan Robinson, but I think they have a much bigger need at corner. And my guess is that he would be their number 1 guy as well. So I think it's a great fit, and they have to take him at 10.
So at 10, I have the Eagles taking Lucas Van Ness. They've been really linked with him recently. And if he's available at 10, I think they completely take him at this point.
Yeah, you had Atlanta earlier grabbing Bijan Robinson. I have them trading down just a couple picks. They're here at 11. I have them taking Bijan Robinson as well. I think he fits really well with their offense. And as you mentioned, they just like to bring in guys with talent. Bijan Robinson, debatably one of the most talented people in this whole draft. I think it's a good selection.
And then at 11, I have the Titans taking CJ Stroud. So a big fall from grace from potentially a number 1 pick. But from what we've heard, many teams wouldn't be surprised if he fell out of the top 7. There's been some concerns with him, especially with his testing scores that he came out with. And I think Tennessee ends up getting their quarterback, whether it's for the immediate future, if he starts day 1, or whatever we see happens with him.
Yeah, and that's a good pick. We're here at 12. I have Houston making a trade down. It's my last trade in my mock. I have it with Tampa Bay. And if you can see where this is going, I think Tampa Bay moves up 7 spots and they're going to take Will Levis. He's lasted around too far on my board. Uh, Tampa Bay doesn't have an immediate option at quarterback. I think Will Levis fits their system really well. And there would be a lot of buzz from, moving on from Tom Brady and grabbing Will Levis. He would definitely have some Mac Jones comparisons, maybe even more than we've already given him. But I think he fits well. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I think giving him a lot of weapons with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin would actually be great for his development. So I think that might be best case scenario for him.
So at 12, I also have a quarterback going. I have the Texans staying here, and they passed on a quarterback at 2, and they still end up getting a quarterback at 12. I have them taking Anthony Richardson.
Interesting. All right. So at 13, we have the Packers here now after the Aaron Rodgers trade. I have them grabbing Quentin Johnston. They're notorious for not taking wide receivers round 1. I think you have to with Jordan Love. You got to give him something more than he already has. Quentin Johnston is our wide receiver 1. You saw in our rankings. But more than anything, he fits their prototype of tall wide receivers on the outside. I think he'd be good there.
So I also have the Packers taking, I would say, arguably the best pass catcher in this draft in Dalton Kincaid.
Interesting. At 14, I like that pick. I just didn't even think about that one. At 14, we have my Patriots here. I'm thrilled to see what you're going to do with this pick. But for me, I think they really need corner. I'm a big Joey Porter Jr. guy, shout out the Nittany Lions. So I have him going at 14. I think you got to add another cornerback to the room because the Patriots got bailed out last year with some overachievers.
So since there's only been one tackle taken up to this point, I have the Patriots taking Peter Skoronski in my draft.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be mad at that. You just mentioned Peter Skoronski. The Jets have been linked with him a lot. I think it'd be a good fit, get another guy up front to help with the newly acquired and Aaron Rodgers. So I think it'd be a good fit. I have him at 15.
I also have the Jets taking someone to protect Aaron Rodgers. I have them taking Broderick Jones.
Yeah. At 16, I think Washington is looking at a tackle in the first round. I say there's a couple guys that fit in well, but in my mock, a lot of guys have gone off the board. My guy Darnell Wright has been a really big riser recently. I think he could go here, and I penciled him in there. I think Washington needs the tackle, and I really think he's a solid player. He's only 22, and I trust SEC linemen more than any other conference.
Yeah. I have Washington going in a different direction. I have them taking Joey Porter at 16 at this point. Devon Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez went a little higher in the top 10, but Joey Porter goes 16 here. I think if they don't take him, the Steelers definitely will.
Yeah. And this Steelers pick was really tough for me. You mentioned how they have a lot of links to Joey Porter Jr. I've been hearing a lot of buzz for another corner. And my mock, Joey Porter's already gone. I like Deontay Banks out of Maryland. I think he could fit well with the Steelers. And if you're Pittsburgh, you got to go O-line or corner in round 1. I think he's the best guy at either of those positions left.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think you got to go O-line at this point, so I'm going to have them taking Darnell Wright.
Yeah. 18, we have Detroit. Detroit could go a lot of different directions. I had them taking Witherspoon earlier. So I think they're going to get an edge rusher here. We both really like Nolan Smith out of Georgia. I think Dan Campbell will like him on the opposite side of Hutchinson as well. So I have Nolan Smith at 18 to the Lions.
So I had them taking Tyree Wilson to kind of bolster up that edge at 6. So I'm going to have them going the opposite side. They're going to take Jackson Smith and Jigba here. He'll be the first receiver taken off my board at 18 to go to the Lions.
Interesting. At 19, I have Houston. I already had Quinn Johnston go earlier, but I think Houston would take Jackson Smith and Jigba at any spot anyways. I think he fits well. You got to give Davis Mills something this year, and then hopefully a future different quarterback, an option for the future.
So there's been a lot of talk about the Bucks going in multiple different directions. There's been one guy that they've been linked at, though, if they do stay at 19 and don't trade up, and that guy is Miles Murphy, and I think they take him here at 19.
Yeah. So no more trades will affect my board from 20 to 32. Seattle's on the clock. I think they could use another receiver, which sounds wild because you have how well Tyler Lockett and DK have been. With that being said, you got to get a guy that does something else. You got to get a slot guy is really what I'm saying. I think Zay Flowers out of Boston College will be that guy. And whatever they decide to do at quarterback in the future doesn't really matter because I think Zay Flowers is a slot guy no matter what system you're in. I really like him. I know you're a big fan of his. If you want to check out Banning's rankings of the wide receivers, check out one of the last videos we just put on the page. It was a great video. You're a big Zay Flowers guy. I'm a big Zay Flowers guy. I think Seattle will be a perfect fit.
Yeah. So my next few picks are all going to be wide receiver. And at this point, the Seahawks it's interesting because, like you said, they may not really need receiver if you look at it, but their guys are getting older, especially Tyler Lockett. So they kind of need a guy who is in a position where they don't really have. And I'm talking about a slot receiver. So I have them going with Zay Flowers here.
I think that's great analysis. At 21, I have my first tight end going off the board. Not my favorite tight end. I'm a big Kincaid guy, as you are. But I think the Chargers are going to look at a guy like Michael Mayer. I think he might fit their system a little better. He's maybe a little bit more prototypical. He's a little younger than Kincaid. There's some things that teams like about him. And I think the Chargers are one of those teams that would roll with Mayer. So at 21, I think it's a good fit for him.
And I have the Chargers going with another pass catcher, but I have them going with a wide receiver in Jordan Addison. Quentin Johnson was still on my board, but if you're the Chargers, you already have pretty much all your receivers are built exactly like Quentin Johnston. So you kind of want something a little different.
I think that's good analysis there. I would agree with that. At 22, this guy slipped too far. I'm a big fan of him. You had him going a lot earlier. Baltimore sees Lucas Van Ness on the edge. They have a couple different needs. I think edge rusher, especially for the future, is a big one. I think he's great. I know he didn't have a lot of time at Iowa, but I think he's going to develop into, just a beast. He reminds me a lot of young J.J. Watt. Don't read into that too much, but I'm sure the Ravens would love to hear that.
At 22, I have the Ravens going with another offensive weapon. I think at this point, Lamar Jackson's going to end up staying one way or another. I think it's too played out for him to get traded at this point. He could get traded on draft night, but I think he's going to stay, especially with signing Odell. I think they're going to get a guy who kind of opposites him with Quentin Johnston here. And I think that really intrigues Lamar Jackson, having him and Odell on the receiving core.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great motivation for Lamar Jackson to stay around. At 23, I have your guy, probably, to my knowledge, one of your favorite prospects in the whole draft. Minnesota's probably a little upset they didn't get one of the top quarterbacks. On draft night, we might see them be a mover. In my mock draft, they stayed here. They're going to hit a completely different direction. Kalijah Kancey is still on the board. I know there's some issues with him being smaller or skinnier, but talent-wise, he's undeniable. Minnesota is a team that loves their defensive tackles. I think they need to bring a new guy in the rotation. So I have Kalijah Kancey at 23.
I still have the Vikings going with my same pick that I had a few weeks ago. I still have them taking Hendon Hooker at this spot. I think they're going to take a quarterback who they can sit for probably a year at this point, or even come in at the end of his first season.
Yeah, fair enough on that. And, they obviously have Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins was known as another guy that was drafted at a very old age. I know the Vikings didn't grab him, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have a problem with Hendon Hooker's age. With that being said, Jacksonville's here at 24. This pick is kind of becoming a little bit popular just because, this guy's so talented and Jacksonville has a positional need after moving on from Harrison Jr. last year. I have Brian Branch going here. He's a talented safety. I think he can play corner really well. Maybe not as much as some of these top corners, but his versatility makes him useful on a Jaguars defense that needs a little more bolstering, I would say.
Yeah, I have the Jaguars going with Nolan Smith here. I think he's fallen way too much, but there's a lot of teams that need offense, and I think the Jaguars fall into a great spot, getting one of the best edge rushers in the draft.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it simple here so you can have your most of the Giants talk. I think the Giants could use a receiver. Jordan Addison's still here. I think it's just a good fit. I think it would be a perfect guy to grab at 25.
So with the Giants, pretty much all of the first round grade wide receivers I have taken off the board at this point. So I think they have to address the other need, and their other need is cornerback. But I do think a guy like Brian Branch, who's a safety, I still think he can drop down and play some spots at cornerback. And like I said before, matching him with Xavier McKinney would be an absolute amazing duo to watch. And I hope if he's available at this spot that they end up taking him.
Yeah, I'm going to make Cowboys fans mad. Just throwing that out there. This is getting a little bit of buzz. Maybe not. Maybe I'm reaching out on a limb here with a couple of sources, but Dallas, I don't think they want to pay Dak Prescott next year. I personally think he's a good quarterback, but Cowboys fans have not been a fan of his recently. Hasn't led to much team success. My guy Hendon Hooker is still here. I know it's a little concerning to definitely have a quarterback on the bench that's already as old as him for a whole year, but I think it lets him recover from his injury. And I think Dallas is going to be electric when he does play. So I have the Cowboys taking an investment that's definitely going to make some fans upset, but I like Hendon Hooker here at 26.
So I have the Cowboys going in a little bit of a different direction. I have them taking Michael Mayer here. And I think if he's available at this pick, I think Dallas would benefit greatly from taking him, and he can be the new mayor of Dallas.
Good one. We gave him a lot of Jason Witten comparisons, like ceiling wise, so that would make Cowboys fans pretty happy. 27, I think Buffalo gets bailed out a little bit here. And we know this guy's talented, but positional need wise, he's not going to go very high. But Buffalo needs an interior lineman really bad. Despite what some draft sites might tell you, I'm pretty hot on Osiris Torrance being the best interior lineman on the offensive side this year. I think he slides in very easily.
So the Bills, I think, need a guy in the trenches. I'm going to go on the opposite side on the defense, and I think they take Kalijah Kancey at 27 here, which will probably be one of the biggest steals in the draft, in my opinion.
Yeah. Every year we see a guy that shouldn't go first round go in the first round. Honestly, we saw Cole Strange last year. We see some other guys. Kadarius Toney is an example that comes to mind.
Yeah,
He's fine,
Mac
but whatever.
Jones.
Yeah, I agree with that. Usually Patriots, but at 28, here's my time to talk about a guy we've never talked about on this podcast that's getting some random first round buzz. Since he really needs a corner, since he likes their fast corners, they value speed over size. I'm going to pencil them in for DJ Turner out of Michigan. He's really fast. He got burnt a lot last year in the Big Ten, but he has the physical, maybe not height stature, but he's just electric. He can cover man to man. So although I don't think this would be the best pick, I think to be realistic, we got to throw some light on a guy that we don't expect. I have DJ Turner here at 28.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point that you brought up. Every year, there's a lot of teams that have probably about 25 kind of first round grades on players. And then after that, once you get towards the back end of the first round, teams kind of go with their first to second round grade, and sometimes even just go with a pure second round grade guy just because there's not as many. And there's been a lot of talk this year that there's not very many pure first round guys compared to past seasons. And I think a guy like DJ Turner that you just talked about, I have him as my eighth best cornerback in this draft. I think there's a lot of high upside on him, especially being fast. So I don't think it's a terrible pick. I do have them in my draft taking a cornerback. I have them taking Deonte Banks. I think a little bit more of a safe pick. He fell a little bit in my draft. And I think the Bengals do go with a cornerback, though, at 28.
Yeah, and to keep it more simple, we're talking about a guy that's fell that probably should have gone a little earlier for me. The Saints need an edge rusher. Miles Murphy is still here. I think he's versatile. I think he's strong. I think he fits well on New Orleans.
So I'm going to have New Orleans taking Miles Murphy's teammate. As Miles Murphy went earlier, I'm going to have them taking Brian Brzee here.
Yeah, and I have Brian Brzee coming up right after. I wanted to move Philly out of this pick a little bit, but I couldn't make it work with any of the trade logic. So I have them sticking here, taking Brian Brzee. Fletcher Cox is aging, and they don't have. You talked earlier about them chasing a guy like Jalen Carter to match up with Jordan Davis. It wasn't possible in my mock. I think Brian Brzee is the next best thing you're going to get at D line this year. So I liked him there.
So I had the Eagles going earlier with Lucas Van Ness on the edge. So I think they address their need for interior linemen here. I have them taking Osiris Torrance, who I think is arguably a top 25 player, but he falls a little bit in my draft, and I have them taking him.
Yeah. Next up, I have a guy who I also think is a top 25 player, but his fit is a little different depending on the team you look at. I think Kansas City needs to address offensive line, get an actual solid guy for the future. I like Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma. I think he would be good on either side of the line, left or right tackle. So I think it would be a good fit there. I like it there.
So with the last pick of the draft, I have the Chiefs taking Maisie Smith here. I think they need D line, and he's been one of my favorite prospects, especially on the D line side. And I think out of Michigan, he was great last year and just overall in his college career. And I think the Chiefs, in the same exact spot that they are pretty much every year. They have a luxury pick. They can just take whoever and doesn't really need to pan out that well for them, if we're being
Yeah.
honest.
And I like him. He doesn't really profile the same as Chris Jones, but as a future replacement, we don't really know how long Chris Jones is going to be around. He's coming towards the end of his contract. You know, big men don't last long in the NFL. So I like that pick. Just do you have anything for Pittsburgh, or are we just going to wrap it up how it's
I
actually
didn't
going
have
to go?
anything for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, no problem. Obviously, this year's a little different because, you know, the Miami's voided pick. But, you know, with that being said, I guess that wraps up our mock drafts.
Yeah, and this draft, like we said, especially at 2, it could go completely different from what we expect. Obviously, the Texans are in a spot where they could go quarterback at 2. They could, like we both had, have Will Anderson at 2, and that will completely shake up the board overall.
Yeah. And for anyone watching, if you follow our Instagram at the Next Man Up Sports, I'm going to be throwing these mock drafts on paper or, you know, on an Instagram post. It's a little easier to digest it that way sometimes. So, I mean, comment on this video, let us know how you feel, but also check out the Instagram. You know, hopefully I get a nice little format there so you can really look at it.
Yeah, and I think that's it for this episode. We talked a lot about the playoffs, and next week we'll have a little bit more of a view on the rest of the playoffs for this season, and we'll see what happens with the draft. We'll have a lot of draft reactions by then. We'll have the whole entire draft by then, all 7 rounds. So we'll have some grades that we'll go through. I'm sure there's going to be some big trades, some big players drafted early or late that we'll talk about. And it'll be exciting to talk about that next week. So we'll see you guys then.
See you guys.